Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Let's Code Easy Tutorials. This time we will show you how to create an iOS application using Swift, which has different features like how to fetch data using API calls, storage of data using offline database called core data or realm, and different other features. Why not make it interesting by having something which will fetch you all your favorite movies, upcoming movies, and all your favorite TV series? And also add some feature which will actually let you know when these are actually getting played in your theaters or in your TV. So let's get started. Let's open Xcode and create a new project. I'll go with a single view application. My app is called Let's Movie, even though it plays TV series. It shows a list of TV series. I'll call it Let's Movie, and it is a Swift application which we are creating. My organization identifier is this, but yours can vary based on what you want to give it. Based on your organization name, you can replace this. And I am going to create an iPhone application which will use core data. So that creates your application. And some things which you need to take care is if you want to run the application in a device, then you need to have a provisioning profile ready, which is an Apple developer ID. So if you're not having that, get one of that. Otherwise, you can just run the application in a simulator. So I have one, so I'm associating that here. Let's make it full screen, and then your project structure is ready, and you might have to make some modifications. I have a view controller. I'll rather call it a home view controller. So the corresponding changes you'll have to make. And also make sure that the association of your view controller in the storyboard is also modified. So instead of this view controller, I need to have it as home view controller. So all that is sorted now. So for showing the movie database list, I have created an account with the MovieDB. For that, they have provided me with an API key, which is my secure key, which I should not be exposing out to the public, but this being not a very critical API, so I'm just showing it to you. So as a first step, let's create a property list where I'll be keeping this information. So for that, create a new file, go to property list, give it a name. I'll call it movie config. Create that. That creates your file. I would rather keep it inside the project, and then add a new row. I'll call it API key. It's a string value, and I'll just copy paste this value there. Save it. So I have created a plist where I have included my secret API key. So to access that within your application, what you have to do is get the path using the bundle which is coming as part of the UI kit. So you call bundle.main and get the path for resource. So the name of the resource that I have created is movie config, and it is of type playlist. So with that, we have tried to access the path of the file. So let's check whether that path is existing or not. So even you can write in another way where you can say if let this, so we can avoid this extra step and then try to access that path directly there. So let's see whether we get the path here. Let's try to print it and see. So let's run. And you can see that it's fetching the path. So the next step is to get the configuration of the API key. So for that, let me create a variable called API key, which is of type string, and initialize it. An exclamation is required there to initialize it. So next step is to get the API key, or rather let's load the dictionary, movie config dictionary, and that you can do using it, nx dictionary dot init, says contents of files, so just pass the path, and using the dictionary we can fetch the API key. So our key is API key and it's of type string. So let's try printing that now. All set. No errors, so let's run it. So we get an API key back. one more check which we should also do is to see whether this dictionary is not null. So we have received an API key now. Now, as we are done with fetching the API key, now let's move on with the other features of the application. So every request that I'll be making to the API will be using the API key. So that's how they have designed the API. So one of the things that I'll be fetching right now, even before fetching the movies list, is to get the configurations. This is required because for fetching the movies images, they are providing a base URL from which I'll be fetching the whole poster image, etc. For that, let's call this configuration. So it's called configuration URL, and the path to that is this along with the API key. So for that, as a first step, let's create a method called fetch configurations. Does not accept any parameters, returns nothing. But then let's keep something as a closure to let the calling method to know that the configuration fetching is complete or not. For that, let's create a closure, and all it returns is a message. So closure is like a variable, a method which you can pass as a parameter. And that parameter, once a method is call is complete, or when even before returning, or if there is no return, we can let the calling method to know that some operation has completed here. So here we are passing it as a parameter which will accept a message as a parameter of type string. So let's go ahead and use the configuration URL which we are having. So let's keep this part as a variable or a constant, because that's not going to change. Let's call it a service URL. So this is going to be same all across. So just replace that part with service URL. So we are having the configuration URL defined here. So instead of the API key, we will replace with our API key. So that request URL is all set. Now let's create a request. It's a URL request. Let's initialize with our configuration URL. So it will accept a type of URL. So we'll have to again create let's initialize that URL with the string, which is configuration URL. So we have created a request object with the configuration URL string. So it being, so that's it. And also define HTTP method. API is get call, so define that as we are modifying this. Instead of let, we'll have to make it as where. So that's also set. So to make this request, we need a session. So we'll call the session object URLSession dot get the shared session and then create a data task. So this is the one I'm interested in. It is accepting the request, and there is a completion handler which will let us know when the URL request was complete, and we can do the error and the response handling there. So it accepts parameters. One is the data itself, one is the response, which is the URL response, and finally the error. So to handle our request, and one more thing we need to do is to call the resume, so that once the data task is created, we execute it. So first step is to check if there is an error or not. So for that, we'll call if error, if it is not null, then let's print and that specific error. Also, let's use on error complete. We will return that error message. If not, then we have a proper response from the API, and we will receive it as data. So the data is, even before everything, let's execute and see what is the response coming back. So let's just print the data part and see whether it's fine or not. So it's asking to make the closure method as escaping or non-escaping. So that is a optimization being added in Swift 3, which is to make sure that the memory management is proper. Escaping is nothing but whether to see that the closure is decoupled easily or not. So it's just a memory management thing which they have added. So let's run and see what the responses are. Oh, even before that, we need to call it the fetch configurations. So that's after we receive the API key. So that's our closure. Even we can print that here. So all set, let's run. So request has received a nil value. Let's check what is the configuration URL which we passed. So you can see that there is an API key is optional, so we have to handle that. We have to unbox that value, so that add the exclamation. So let's see. Let's also try printing the configuration URL. So there are no errors now, and the API key is unboxed and it is showing the right value here. So the fetching is successful now. Let's handle that whatever data that we fetched. So we need to deserialize and make it as a JSON object. So for that, let's call it configurations JSON, and use the JSON parser to do the handling of data. So we are fetching the JSON data. It should be a JSON data. It's a JSON object. Get rid of this part. And the data is our data. We don't need any options passed here. It's still giving some errors, so unbox that value. And JSON, there needs to be exception handler here because that is something mandated by this JSON serialization call. So we'll have to include it within a try block, or let's just call it try exclamation which will handle it. So this step is fetching us the configuration and deserializing it as a JSON element. Also, let's make sure that it is deserialized as an index dictionary. So let's try printing the configuration. So previously it just returned the bytes. So in this case we are trying to return whether it will return the actual JSON element. So let's run and see. So it's not showing anything. Let's put a breakpoint and see. Two key values, and you can see that it's returning a whole set of configurations, and the one we are interested in this is the images, where it returns the base URL or the secured base URL which we will use to download the image. So let's try fetching the images element from the dictionary and then the secure base URL. So next step is to get the images dictionary from the configurations JSON. That's in turn again an index dictionary, and let's define something called as a base URL, which is of type string, initialized. It has to be a variable because we will be setting that value at this point. So just dictionary value of whatever is being fetched from here. It's a secure base URL, which is HTTPS. Let's use that. So at this point it should fetch us the base URL, and let's do the onComplete. Pass this as the completion message, or its base URL has to be so let's call it base URL. We are passing that it should be received here and printed. Let's see whether that works or not. Clear the earlier logs. There you have it, the base URL, which is not yet unboxed, but it shows the values. So to just see that value, all you have to do is unbox it. There's the final result. Base URL is returned here, which we will use to download the image. Moving on, let's start fetching the actual movie list which we are interested in. Before that, let me show you what we are trying to do. This is the design I have made to show the all the movies, upcoming movies on this list. Before that, it shows a splash screen like this, and then fetches the images and the content relevant to the movies and shows this in this format. So this is what we are trying to do in this tutorial. There are some elements like add it to favorites, which is an offline thing which we will consider at a later point. But the primary thing that we are trying to do here is to fetch the movie list and show in that fashion. So let's get started fetching the movie list. Create a method called fetch movies, or let's call it fetch upcoming movies. Does not accept anything. Again, let's create a completion block which accepts returns nothing. More or less does the same thing like the previous configuration fetches. So for the movie, fetching the movie, we need to use this URL. So let's call it movies URL. Again, replace this part with our service URL and the API key, our API key. And as you can see, the movies URL is trying to fetch the first page. It can have multiple pages. But the initial call is to get the first page, which will return a set of values. So movies URL, one thing we need to make sure it's unboxed here, and create another request for the movies URL, URLSession, URL request, init with our URL, similar to what we did in the last step for fetching the configurations. It's the movies URL which we are passing here. And again, the request type is the method type. HTTP method is get here. Create a URL session. data task with our URL request, which is our request, and the completion handler. The same set of completion handlers, parameters being response and error. We'll do the same steps. If there is an error, we report it back as an error. It's not printed. It's anyway getting printed on complete. So, and instead of this that's again handling the escaping condition, which is a new mandatory thing in Swift 3. So the JSON response that we are expecting is a movies list JSON element. Maybe let's call it movies results, because it might not directly give us the movies list. Instead, it can also have the page numbers and things like that. So we're expecting it to be a dictionary of things, and it might just return within the results as an array. So let's call it as NS array. So what this means is the results data is coming back as an NX dictionary, and within the movies results JSON, there will be a results element, which is an array of elements, which will be our actual movies list dictionary. We don't need this. So if this is returned, let's report this back as the movies element. So we are returning that list of dictionaries on complete. So we have to actually do it after fetching configuration. On completion of it, let's just call the fetch upcoming movies, and it also has a message to return. Let's print that message. So if everything works fine, the final output will be the list of movies as shown here. So let's have a look. Okay, something we missed is the resume. So let's run and see what happens. So you can see the response has printed a list of movies, starting with Underworld, which is an upcoming movie. So it has different paths for backdrop image, the poster path, etc., which we will actually use to render in a table view in the next tutorial.